space and equipment planning system, and building information modeling. A lot of information is gathered during a department update for SEPS. IDIQ AEs are brought on board by the VA to gather a team of specialists that understand healthcare practices and design requirements. There's an incredible amount of knowledge gathered around a project like this and collected to make information that is then put into SEPS as a criteria. These decisions are often captured in documents, often in sketches like this and other narrative documents that are then assembled for all the spaces in the department update. These documents are then used as a basis for creating digital files that are imported into the till, parked on the till for design teams to use as a source of information for future projects. The criteria from these documents is also input into SEPS. So SEPS becomes an engine and a place to hold the decisions that are made for these department updates. So it's incredibly important information that is digested down and put into SEPS as an engine that then is used for the designing of projects. So when you get into a project process, a program for design and a project room contents are exported from SEPS that say here are the requirements for a project that then gets handed to the design team that goes through their design process and hands back documents, often in digital format, back to the VA for the construction of a project. So this flow of information about what is needed in a healthcare facility that is collected from experts that are the information is updated periodically and stored in SEPS as an engine. SEPS essentially is a database with an engine and algorithms that help take input data statements and say, what do you need in this healthcare facility, and output requirements, program for design, and project room contents that the design architect then has to review and evaluate. And then the documents in the till are also used for reference to design these projects. The challenge really is that the documents in the till often have outdated information because it's not updated on a regular basis, and they don't match SEPS, even recent documents. Because of the complexity, there's millions of data points that are assembled, and it's very difficult to keep them in sync, especially if it's done in a manual process. Architects are using building information modeling to help capture data into three-dimensional models like this, but more importantly, it's about the data and the decisions that are being made are visualized and also captured as data that can be used for a lot of other things, obviously for design and construction. But if you think in terms of capturing knowledge of input from these healthcare experts that are deciding on an update for a department or a chapter in SEPS, this data, this new process, since it's data-centric, and if the BIM format is followed based on a specification, that data is much more suited to be imported into SEPS and used as a basis for the data that gets stored in SEPS. And at the same time, SEPS can also be used to generate data that creates a document in the till. In other words, there's not two separate flows of information. Ultimately, the goal is to have a single source of truth and be able to use that to input and store information and knowledge in SEPS, and from the SEPS database to essentially create, for example, a list of spaces and equipment that go into this department. And from SEPS then, also on the output side, there's already the capability to output data in a format that can be imported and create a BIM, a building information model, for the design and construction team. So this flow is a much more direct way to deal with a lot of data in a digital format and automate the process to allow the designer more time to make design decisions that cannot be automated. So essentially having the requirements coming from SEPS. The new workflow here does not change SEPS. It does not change how users of SEPS interact with SEPS. It's just the difference now is to realize to ask the design and construction team, for example, to use data and BIM to output and work with their projects, and the criteria input and the IDIQAs that work with updating the departments and chapters to realize to use BIM and data in a format that can be linked into SEPS. So what ultimately is happening here is that a one-to-one match between SEPS and BIM, whether it's a criteria, a standard space like this, a dental exam room, or an output that comes as a project, there's a one-to-one match with all the elements in the space and the data points in SEPS. So SEPS is, the structure of SEPS is already very well suited for using BIM. It's a database. BIM is a database as well. So that's the opportunity that's in front of us because of this capability that SEPS already has. Essentially, with a few minor tweaks, it's possible to work with BIM. And ultimately, the goal really is, if the requirements from SEPS end up in the actual constructed facility, you end up with satisfied patients. And that's really the goal. There's also an effort underway to look at a more efficient way of gathering documents and standardizing the documentation, for example, the PG 1812. Using Max, Max currently hosts SEPS, so there's another tool in Max called Max Collect that allows one to actually structure information and be able to share it. It's on the web, so you can have multiple teams inputting data and narratives and tables and documents even, and assembling a chapter update that can be published as a PDF file. So you have the best of both worlds. You have the data and the structure and the output as a digital document. And where this is all really heading is by thinking in terms of data as part of the design process and making the data accessible in many different formats, whether it's in a database coming out of SEPS as an Excel file, or going into a BIM, or even into mobile devices, as we're becoming more and more used to thinking in terms of how do we get to data in a simple format, because the complexity of designing a healthcare facility absolutely requires simplicity in the way of how we interact with it, and to allow more stakeholders to be able to access the information. So the end result is really the value of SEPS. Layering BIM on top of that really bumps up the potential of what can be done with this and how to streamline the process of design and construction, and also how to streamline the process of managing and capturing knowledge and information. That's really the biggest value here. Because of the number of projects that are run through SEPS, it's a perfect place to start storing information about what are best practices for designing and constructing healthcare facilities, and then linking it to SEPS automatically generates the result of that in a building information model that is used for design and construction.